It goes without saying that the most popular type of Pokemon in Pokemon Go and beyond is going to be Dragon types. In this video, I'm going to be doing a tier list for every single Dragon type Pokemon that currently exists in Pokemon Go and ranking them based on how useful they are. Alright, so with that said, let's get right into it. Alrighty, let's dive right into it. So, this is going to be my tier list for every single Dragon type Pokemon in Pokemon Go, and a lot of them is going to be ranked based on their usefulness, not necessarily their iconography. It's basically going to be how useful these Pokemon are. Now, something I'm doing very differently compared to previous tier lists is that I'm adding an additional tier called the S+ tier. The reason for that is because there's certain Dragon types that are going to be miles ahead compared to other Dragon types, even those that I would consider S tier. So because of that, I'm adding an S+ tier for this specific tier list. And yeah, with that said, let's jump right into it. So we're going to start off with all of the basic evolutions for each of these Dragon types, and they're basically all going to be trashed here. Dratini is very iconic, of course. Axew is pretty cool. Fergabax, all of these are basically trashed here. Tyrant, on the other hand, I'm going to put in the D tier because it might have some uses within the Go Battle League's Little Cup. Aside from that, yeah, all of these are basically just there for farming up candies. The argument could be made for a couple of them when it comes to like the Little Cup, but I just really cannot justify them being anything more than trash tier Pokemon. They're not going to be alone here, however, so we're going to keep this going. Next up, we got, of course, Altaria. This one's going to be a B tier Pokemon. It's not going to be useful for raid battles by any means, but this Pokemon is actually really good for the Great League. So because of that, I'm going to throw it in the B tier. It actually has a lot of good uses within the Go Battle League. And now it's Mega Evolution, Mega Altaria. This is going to be an A tier Pokemon, simply for the fact that it is a Mega Evolution and it has a lot of different diverse moves. This Pokemon is going to be quite useful in raid battles if you don't have other Mega Evolutions to use. It's definitely one worth investing into, and I do think it's well deserving of being an A tier Pokemon. Now next up we got Kingdra. This is another Pokemon that's kind of more niche towards PvP. Like, it's going to be pretty decent in the Ultra League, and possibly even in the Master League, depending on the restrictions that are in place. But Kingdra is a pretty solid Pokemon, and I do think it's going to be a B tier Pokemon. It unfortunately doesn't have any other uses, but in terms of PvP, it's definitely going to be useful in some ways. Next up, we got ourselves Mega Charizard X. I believe this is X. In fact, this is going to be a Dragon-type Pokemon, believe it or not. This is also going to be an A-tier Pokemon simply because it does deal a good amount of DPS. It's not going to be top tier when it comes to Dragon-type Mega Evolutions or Fire-type Mega Evolutions, but it is definitely going to be useful if you do not have the top tier ones. The same can be said for Mega Ampharos. Unfortunately, I'm going to put this more in the B tier for the simple fact that Mega Ampharos is just going to fall behind compared to pretty much every other Dragon type or Electric type Mega Evolution. Seriously, I don't think I've ever used Mega Ampharos like in the slightest bit. It's not really that good, and that's a real shame considering it is a Mega Evolution. Now, let's move on to Alolan Exeggutor. This one is going to be a D tier Pokemon. I think the only nice thing about it is that it gives you extra Stardust for being an evolved Pokemon. Aside from that, I really cannot say this is a Pokemon that's going to be useful in any way. I know there's some players out there who will make the argument for PvP, but come on, there's going to be way better Dragon types as well as Grass types, and the uses for this Pokemon is going to be pretty niche, and I just cannot justify it ever being useful. Alright, next up we got Shieldon, which is of course the evolved form of Bagon. This one's going to be a D tier. It's not going to be useful ever. It's kind of like the basic evolution where it's basically there for candies. You won't find this Pokemon useful in PvP or PvE. It's basically just there to be evolved. But considering that it does give you a little extra Stardust and additional candies, catching it is going to be more beneficial to you compared to Bagon. So it's a D tier Pokemon. Now let's talk about Salamence. This is going to be an A tier Pokemon simply for the fact that it is a very powerful Dragon type raid attacker. It's also going to be really good as a Mega Evolution, which we'll get into next. But yeah, Salamence is going to be godly. It's definitely a very strong Pokemon, especially if you have its shadow form. Next up, we got Mega Salamence. This is our first S tier Pokemon. It's self-explanatory. It's the best Dragon-type non-legendary Mega Evolution in the game, and it's going to be really strong, especially if you do not have those legendary Mega Evolutions. In fact, I would say it's even stronger than some of the Mega Evolutions that are legendary that we're going to get into later. Yeah, it's a very solid Pokemon, and you should definitely invest into it. Next up, we got Frigibax, just like, actually, I'm going to put this in the C tier, simply because there are some moments where it's going to be useful in PvP. So yeah, solid C tier. Next up, we got its evolved form, Baxcalibur. This is going to be an A tier Pokemon, for the simple reason it's one of the best Ice-type raid attackers, on top of being a decent Dragon-type raid attacker as well. So, Baxcalibur, definitely an A tier Pokemon. Next up, we got Vibrava. I'm going to be struggling with a lot of these Pokemon pronunciations. That's very commonplace on my YouTube channel, but yeah, this Pokemon is going to be a D tier for much of the same reasons as Shieldon. It's possible you could use this Pokemon in PvP, but aside from that, it's just there for you to get extra candies and Stardust. Now, its evolved form, Flygon, is actually a Pokemon that I feel like is missing some potential. It does have a really good Community Day move, but unfortunately, it's going to fall behind in terms of DPS compared to other Pokemon, and you really can't find a place for it in PvP. But aside from that, it's a decent Pokemon to have if you don't have other Dragon types. So yeah, I'm going to include it in the B tier. It's still going to be able to hold its own. Next up, we got Dragonair. This is another B tier Pokemon, much for the same reasons as Altaria. This Pokemon is actually pretty good in PvP. So yeah, I could very easily justify it being a B tier, plus it's going to give you a lot of candies when you catch it. So next up, let's move on to the one and only Dragonite. This is going to be a solid A tier Pokemon. I almost want to put it in the S tier Pokemon simply because of how iconic it is, but yeah, this Pokemon is phenomenal. It's basically going to be your second best Dragon type raid attacker compared to most of the other Dragon types, and it's also going to be really solid in the Master League, especially its Shadow form. There's a lot of uses for this Pokemon, regardless if you're a PvPer or a PvEer. This is definitely a Pokemon worthy of the A tier. Next up, we got Latios and Latias. I'm going to put both of these in the C tier. Latios could potentially be a B tier, but both of these Pokemon are going to fall behind even Pokemon like Dragonite in terms of raid DPS, so both of these are going to be solid C tiers. And their Mega Evolutions, Mega Latias and Mega Latios, both of them are going to be B tiers, unfortunately. Even though they are legendary Mega Evolutions, they're just simply bad compared to the other Mega Evolutions that are Dragon types. Like even Mega Altaria, considering the amount of move diversity that Pokemon has, it's still going to be considered more useful compared to both of these Mega Evolutions. It's really sad because they're really cool, and I really wish they were a lot more powerful. Next up, we got Druddigon. This is going to be a Pokemon I'm going to throw in the C tier. Yeah, there's not many gameplay uses for Druddigon. Maybe you could use it in PvP, but aside from that, it's not going to be among the best Dragon-type raid attackers. And just, yeah, it's just there, basically. So, Zweilous is next. Another D tier Pokemon for the same reasons as Shieldon and Vibrava. It's going to be there for candies. Actually, I'm going to throw it in the C tier, mainly because when it comes to certain specialty cups, Zweilous is actually pretty good, considering that it is both a Dark and Dragon type Pokemon. I actually think it's a big terror in some of the specialty cups that we've had in the past, and I think in the future we're going to see it be useful again and again. And its evolved form, Hydreigon. This is another A tier Pokemon. One of the best Dark type Pokemon in the game. It's also a decent Dragon type raid attacker. This Pokemon has the potential to be one of the best Pokemon in the game, bar none, once it receives its Shadow form. Brutal Swing is just such a strong move on this Pokemon. It's definitely one worth investing into. Next up, we got Mega Sceptile. This is, I kind of want to put it in the S tier simply because it's the best grass type raid attacker at the moment, but in terms of dragon types, it's going to be an A tier. It's a really high DPS Pokemon, but you're not necessarily going to be using it for dragon type raid damage, but it is pretty strong as a grass type raid attacker. So yeah, in terms of every single dragon type, it's going to be an A tier Pokemon. Next up, we got, I think this is Goodra. No, Goodra's pre-evolved form. I actually forgot what this Pokemon's name is. We'll just throw it in the D tier. It's a lot of the same reasons we went over, but Goodra is going to be, actually, I'm inclined to put it in the C tier, mainly because there's really no place for it right now. Like, it's a very powerful Pokemon, don't get me wrong, but because of the moveset that it currently comes with, and because its stats are more on the defensive end, it's going to be more of a C tier Pokemon. Now, do keep in mind that it eventually will be getting a Community Day, possibly this year in 2024, and if it gets a really good move, it could potentially become a staple pick in the Go Battle League, especially in the Ultra League and Master League. So do keep on the lookout for that. I do suspect that Goodra is going to creep its way up to the B tier or possibly even the A tier. Alright, next up we got ourselves a very solid S tier Pokemon. This is regular Rayquaza, not the Mega Evolution, we'll get into that later, but regular Rayquaza is by far the best Dragon-type raid attacker in the game right now. It's very strong. I mean, I'm of course talking about non-Mega Evolutions or non-Shadows, but yeah, Rayquaza is very solid. It's very much an S tier Pokemon. On top of that, it's also really good for the Master League, believe it or not. Like, ever since it received Dragon Ascent, as well as Breaking Swipe. After it received those moves, this Pokemon is actually quite useful. Unfortunately, Breaking Swipe did get a massive nerf this past season, or this current season, so Rayquaza did kind of got knocked down a little bit, but it's still a very solid Pokemon to use. Next up, we got Tyrantrum, I think that's the name of this Pokemon. This is going to be a solid C tier. Actually, no. I'm going to put it in the B tier. The reason why I say that is because it's a very good Rock-type raid attacker, and possibly a good Dragon-type raid attacker as well. If you are lacking in any of these Pokemon, it's a solid Pokemon to invest into, especially considering that Tyrant is not that hard to get. So, yeah, very solid B tier Pokemon. Next up, we got the pre-evolved, oh my god, I'm so bad with these Pokemon names. This one's going to be in the D tier. Very simple. It's not going to be good in anything, possibly in PvP. A lot of the same reasons for the other second stage evolutions. But Haxorus over here is going to be a solid B tier. It's a very solid raid attacker when it comes to dragon types, if you are lacking in any of these. It's pretty strong, and I do think it has some uses in PvP as well. Next up, we got Gabite. I believe this is what the Pokemon is called. Yep, another D tier. And then we got Garchomp. This is actually my favorite pseudo-legendary. And because of that, I'm going to put it in the A tier. Now, something to keep in mind. Garchomp is really strong as a Pokemon. It's a very solid raid attacker. You could currently get its shadow form from Team Go Rocket Battles, and when it comes to the Master League, it's a Pokemon that could get you a lot of wins. It's a very solid Pokemon, and I think it's kind of underrated compared to the other dragon types. But you know what's not underrated? Mega Garchomp, and this one's going to be our S tier Pokemon. It's very powerful as both a ground type and a dragon type. In fact, I would say that it rivals Mega Salamence in terms of being the top DPS. That's not, well, I don't want to spoil it, but there is one Pokemon that's going to be better than these two, but these are both currently number 2 in terms of raid DPS with dragon types. Next up, we got Dialga. Very tricky with this one because in terms of the Master League, it is an absolute essential Pokemon. And on top of that, it can hold its own in terms of raid DPS. It's very tanky. It has a lot of TDO. Yeah, let's just do it. Let's put it in the S tier, considering just how powerful and iconic it is for the Master League. Compared to the other Pokemon on this list, it's probably the one Pokemon you're going to see the most within the Master League. So because of that, I'm going to throw it in the S tier. That is subject to change. But yeah, let's move on. We got Palkia. This one, on the other hand, is going to be a C tier. And the reason for that is because it's really difficult to use this Pokemon. It can be useful in the Master League, but you really have to build a solid team around it. Unfortunately, I just can't justify putting it up any higher. It can be a good raid attacker, but oh my gosh, there's so many better dragon types and water types out there. It's going to be a solid C tier, unfortunately. Really sorry about that, Palkia fans, but I really can't justify putting it up any higher. Next up, we got Giratina Altered Form. This one's going to be a B tier. It's kind of niche to PvP, but even so, it's a very powerful Pokemon. Definitely worthy of being a B tier. Giratina Origin Form, however, is going to be an A tier. And the reason for that is because it is one of the best Ghost type raid attackers. And in terms of dragon types, it's going to be one of the best when it comes to PvP. even much better than altered form. So yeah, definitely an A tier. And then we got Regidrago. This is going to be a C tier Pokemon. Pretty solid as a dragon type raid attacker, I would say. It's actually a glass cannon. It's kind of like the dragon equivalent to Deoxys attack form. It's extremely squishy, but it also deals a lot of DPS. Unfortunately, because of its squishy factor, it's not going to see a lot of play in raid battles or especially PvP. Next up, we got Zekrom. Now, this is a fan favorite, and I'm very tempted to put it in the S tier. In fact, I think I will for now. The reason why I say that is because it is the #1 non-shadow electric type raid attacker, and in terms of PvP, it's very solid. You know what? I'm actually going to put it in the A tier. I don't wanna kind of compare it to these Pokemon. I just feel like it's not quite there, but it's so close. Zekrom and especially Reshiram, both of these Pokemon are some of the best Pokemon to invest into. They're extremely useful and they're the best of their types. Reshiram especially, it's the #1 fire type Pokemon in the game that's not a Mega Evolution or a Shadow, and it's definitely really strong as a raid attacker as well as with PvP. It's also probably the most useful Pokemon when it comes to Team Go Rocket battles as well. That's something that I don't think a lot of players actually talk about, but yeah, it's a very solid Pokemon. Next up, we got the, oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on its name, but the ice one of these two. But in any case, this Pokemon is actually pretty good in the Master League. It's one of the most underutilized Pokemon, and it's also one of the Pokemon that I don't think a lot of players know how to deal with. So I actually think this Pokemon is solid as a B tier Pokemon. If you can actually invest into it, I actually think you might actually get some really good wins. Kyurem, that's the name of the Pokemon, yeah. But in any case, Dragal, I do not remember, nor do I care what the name of this Pokemon is. I'm going to throw it in the trash tier. Some players will say this Pokemon is good in PvP, and I've actually seen it quite a lot when I'm tanking my matches. I really do not think this Pokemon is useful in any way. Sometimes in the specialty cups, maybe you'll see it. Maybe that's why it should be in the D tier. Yeah, that's the landing spot for this Pokemon. But I really do not know anything about this Pokemon. It's one of the most forgettable in the game. Next up, we got Noivern. This is a Pokemon I'm going to throw in the D tier. It's not useful in any way, unfortunately. Even the Community Day move that it got, it doesn't help it out one bit. Boom Burst, like, what is the point of that move? There's no reason for this Pokemon to exist. It's going to be a solid D tier. I would almost say it should be a trash tier. But we're going to reserve the trash tiers for Pokemon that are just only existing to get candy. So yeah, moving right along, we got Zygarde, the basic form. This one's going to be a D tier. I feel like this Pokemon is just there for you to power up to its complete form. We got Zygarde 50%. For the same reasons, it's a D tier. And now we get to the complete form of Zygarde. This is going to be our first S+ tier Pokemon. It's currently #1 in the Master League, and I actually think if you manage to get yourself a 100% IV complete Zygarde and max it out, it's going to be one of the most useful Pokemon in your collection. The stats are absolutely insane for this Pokemon. It's kind of comparable to both Groudon and Kyogre, which is saying a lot when it comes to Dragon types. It's definitely a very powerful Pokemon, and very, very few players are going to actually get this Pokemon. So yeah, because of that, S+ tier. Next up, we got Turtonator. Solid trash tier Pokemon. I said earlier that all these Pokemon wouldn't be alone, and it's because I was thinking about Turtonator. I really despise this Pokemon, and I think it has absolutely zero uses in Pokemon Go. It's basically there for you to be frustrated over trying to get its shiny form, and I was lucky enough to get a shiny form, but through trades, and I really do not like this Pokemon at all. It's going to be a trash tier. If you can make an argument for it being not a trash tier, I would love to hear those arguments in the comments down below. Next up, we got Jangmo-O's, I think it's called Hakamo-O. I'm really bad with Pokemon names. This is going to be a D tier Pokemon. Oh, nope, I'm actually going to put it in the C tier. I've actually seen this Pokemon used in PvP quite a lot, and used quite seriously. Like, especially in some specialty cups, this Pokemon might be underrated. Kind of like Zweilous. Like, you might actually be able to use this Pokemon effectively. And that's saying quite a lot, considering that most of these second stage evolutions are pretty much D tier Pokemon. But in any case, let's move on to Jangmo-O. I really want this Pokemon to be somewhere up here. But again, it's going to be a C tier Pokemon. Unfortunately, not a lot of uses for this Pokemon, and in terms of PvP, it's going to have less uses than even the second stage. So I'm going to put this in the C tier. I really hope it eventually gets a really good Community Day move, because I want this Pokemon to be a much higher tier. But for right now, it's going to be a C tier. And joining it is going to be Guzzlord. And I know a lot of players are going to be against me saying this, but Guzzlord is absolutely useless in my opinion. There's a lot of players who are using it in the Ultra League right now, and possibly even in the Master League, but aside from that, I really cannot see a very good test case for when Guzzlord is going to be extremely useful. It's a very cool Pokemon, don't get me wrong, and I have myself a 100% IV, so if I want to max it out for some trolling, I guess that's one way I can use it, but yeah, it's a C tier Pokemon. If you can make the argument for it being useful, I would love to hear it. But yeah, finally, let's move on to probably the greatest Mega Evolution and Dragon-type Pokemon that we've ever gotten, and what we will always have. That is, of course, Mega Rayquaza. This is our last Pokemon that we're going to talk about. It's very obviously an S+ tier, possibly even should be up here alone. In fact, I'm going to move Zygarde Complete Form down to the S tier because all of these Pokemon are really strong. If Mega Rayquaza did not exist, we wouldn't have the need for an S+ tier. Mega Rayquaza is by far the strongest Dragon-type Pokemon in the game. Both Dragon Ascent as well as either Breaking Swipe or Outrage is going to make this Pokemon one of the best Flying-type or Dragon-type Pokemon you will ever have, and it's also just all around really cool. I love the way Niantic released Mega Rayquaza, and I also like the fact that, you know, it's basically going to make the game super easy if you can get this Mega Evolution. Yeah, regardless, I think this is a very solid tier list. I think everything here makes sense. I do think there's going to be some disagreements, and I totally think a lot of those disagreements are going to be well merited. Some of these are a little bit of my opinions, and yeah, I personally think this is very accurate, but I could be wrong. There could be cases made for this being completely inaccurate, and if you think so, I would love to know what you are thinking down below. Definitely share all of your thoughts regarding Dragon-type Pokemon, and tell me how you would make this tier list differently. I would love to hear it, and let's have a great discussion. And yeah, that's going to be it. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I always love making tier list videos. They're just a lot of fun and gives me a lot of insight into the nitty-gritty of Pokemon Go. Like, there's a lot of Pokemon here that I never pay attention to, and I had to pay attention to them when it comes to making a tier list. So yeah, if you want to see more of these tier lists, definitely say so in the comments, and I'll take your suggestions to heart. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. If you ended up enjoying it, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if it's your first time here. And don't forget that little bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. I'll definitely be making more tier list videos in the future, so stay tuned for that. And if you want to support my channel in any way, make sure you go and check out my Patreon. I would just want to thank all of you who are my Patreon supporters. If you want to become a patron, just check out the links in the description below. And for all my patrons, they get a permanent spot on my in-game friends list. So if you want to interact with me in some way within Pokemon Go, like with remote raids or the friendship system, then do consider becoming a patron on my Patreon. And if you want to support my channel without spending any money, you could always do so by following me on social media. My handle is @Jinsula, and I'm on these following platforms. Alright, and that's going to be it. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you all later.